Thank you everyone for joining us today. We are still having a few people log in, so we'll give folks another 30 seconds or so to get on the call, and then we'll get going.
Hello. Hi, Gordon. Yeah. Everything's fine.
All right, we're going to get started so we can keep this to an hour as we suggested it would be. Good afternoon. My name is Brian Pallasch. I'm the CEO and Executive Vice President of the International Institute of Building Enclosure Consultants. Thank you all for joining us today for this important webinar on how the construction and A&E community is dealing with COVID-19 and some of the resources that IBEC may have available for you all. My first job is to read Article 21, so I'm going to do that right straight away. Discussions of Article 21. These policies and procedures apply to all meetings of the membership board, committees, other meetings sponsored by IBEC, and all meetings attended by reps of IBEC and IBEC employees in all of their activities within the scope of their employment. Discussions of price or price levels are prohibited. In addition, no discussion is permitted of any elements of a company's operations which might influence price. It is a violation of antitrust laws to agree not to compete. Therefore, discussions of division of territories or customers or limitations on the nature of business carried on or products sold are not permitted. Boycotts in any form are unlawful. Discussion relating to boycotts is prohibited, including discussions about blacklisting or unfavorable reports about particular companies, including their financial situation. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We've got a information-packed hour for you. We have 4 panelists, and I'll do a brief introduction of each of them so we can dispense with that. Scott Hinesley, many of you know, he's the now current president of IBEC and is the president of a local engineering firm in North Carolina called REI Engineers, a regional engineering firm actually. Ted Sheridan is the first vice president of IBEC and is also the president of Fishburne and now it's escaping me. Sorry, Ted. Fishburne and Sheridan up in Canada. And then we have Stephen Safran, who is IBEC's general counsel, and we do a lot of work with him on issues of legal compliance for IBEC. And then our 4th panelist is Paul Miller, who is the principal in a lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. called Miller and Wenhold. I've had the pleasure of knowing Paul for many years. I won't let on to how many so that some of you think that we are younger than we are. So with that, I want to hand this over to Scott Hinesley. And thank you all for being here, and I'll come back on at the end.
Hey, Brian, thanks. Thanks all of you for attending. I appreciate you all taking the time to hear us out for a little bit. When we had our meeting of the members week before last, I expressed my optimism about our ability to get through this, and nothing's changed in that. I do want to enforce in all of you that you know, these are extremely difficult times, but I am optimistic that there's daylight on the other side of this. And from all reports, you know, there's going to be some great opportunities on the other side of this for all of us. So I just strongly encourage everyone to keep their chins up, hang in there. We're going to get through this, and we're going to come out better on the other side. So with that, and it may be Katie, whoever's running the slides, if you want to go on to the next one, what we want to touch on a little bit of perspectives and how we're all being affected by COVID-19 pandemic. The slide, I'm going to go a little bit off script in that the slide has some resources for individuals and businesses, but both Stephen Safran and Paul Miller are going to be touching on that
Are you able
soon.
have you ever to do FaceTime with your family? Yeah.
If someone's speaker is on or mic is on, if you don't mind just muting that.
Respectfully, we should all mute.
Would be awesome. Thank you. Like I said, I'm going to go a little bit off script because I think Stephen Safran and Paul Miller are going to touch on a lot of these resources that are available. One thing I do want to talk about, though, is the state of the AE and construction in the United States. And really, it depends on who you talk to. It's kind of a mixed bag. Some states are enforcing complete construction site lockdowns so that there's no construction going on at all. Others are allowing it with limited continuation, and then others are moving along like everything's fine. So it really does depend on where you are as to what the state of the construction in the United States is. ACEC, the American Council of Engineering Companies, has published quite a few documents outlining construction, and there's a lot that are just moving forward. A lot of the design work that's being performed right now by our members, that's not necessarily been affected. So it really does depend on where you are. Another thing is, kind of regardless of what we're looking at right now, things are subject to change. Things are changing by the minute. We do see a lot of the strategies that we're employing, they seem to be paying off in that we're seeing a reduced number of cases that are being reported every day. Now, whatever's behind that, we don't know, but it would seem to point to the fact that what we're doing, all of us sort of hiding from everyone else, for lack of a better term, seems to be paying off. So I think we need to strongly consider that and keep up those practices. But if you want to move on to the next slide there, the thing we need to concentrate on is being safe. We need to protect ourselves. We need to protect our family. We need to protect those around us who might be much more vulnerable than what we are to the disease. You can't say it enough. You got to wash your hands, and I know we're getting tired of listening to that, but it's something that we've got to do. We've got to be conscious of the spread of germs, and the absolute best thing that we can do is avoid exposure to ourselves. That will certainly protect us. Avoid close contact with others. Clean and disinfect surfaces, and if you have any symptoms of anything, whether you think it is coronavirus or not, err on the side of caution and immediately remove yourself from contact with other people. That's vitally important. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see the number of cases rise, and it's just going to push this thing out farther. So, next slide. I wanted to talk just a little bit about how my company has been affected and what we've done. Katie, if you'll go to the next slide, please. So much like everything else we've seen, we've had, so my company, we've got roughly 100 employees. We've got 8 different offices that are mostly spread throughout the eastern United States, up Pennsylvania down through Florida. And what we're seeing is generally consistent with everything that we're reading, in that there's absolutely no consistency. Some offices are running just like everything's fine. The design work is proceeding normally. There have been some job sites shut down such that field personnel maybe have been brought back home or to the office. We have our offices, all of our offices remain open, but we're encouraging everyone to work from home. We're trying to provide the resources necessary. One of the things that we currently struggle with are licenses to our VPN. And so we have to be somewhat strategic. We don't have enough licenses and can't get enough licenses to allow everyone to access our servers from home. So that's a new issue that we're facing and we're trying to deal with. Some of that helps itself because we're finding some people just want to work late at night when not everyone else is going to be on the server. So that does free up some of the bandwidth and allows individuals to be able to access project files and whatnot. We're trying to stay in contact with everyone as much as possible. It's difficult, and you know, what we don't want to do is overwhelm someone with webinars and emails about coronavirus. How many emails have each of you gotten regarding coronavirus and safe work practices and the impact on the economy and all of that? I mean, it's almost like we're kind of beating a dead horse, but so we're trying to be respectful of everyone's time. But I think the main thing is we want everyone to know that, you know, we're here if we can be a resource to you. If you have a question or if you have a concern or if there's any anxiety that a simple phone call can help resolve, we want to be there. And so that's sort of why we're trying to stay in touch. Our company has offered an employee assistance program, which is, you know, invaluable because it can provide anonymous support for individual issues, be it business or personal. There's a lot of both right now. So I think having that at your fingertips is something that can be extremely valuable to you and your team. So regarding the payroll protection program, I'm sure that many of you have looked into it, and that's for small businesses. It is something that we have applied for. We have not heard anything from it yet. The last I heard, and this was last week, I heard that the program was burning through something on the order of $1 billion an hour. And so it was looking to be fully utilized within a short period. So if you've not yet applied for the PPP and think it's something that you should utilize, then I would certainly encourage you to contact your bank and work with them. They can help you through this process. But I do think there's additional efforts to provide more financing for small businesses to be able to weather this storm. Our company individually has never had a line of credit. It's not something that we've ever needed, but we went ahead and tried to be proactive and at least apply for a line of credit through our bank so that we could have those resources should the need arise. And really, I think currently, and I'm not saying it's going to be the same going forward, but what we have seen as the biggest impact to our business operations right now has been a slowdown in our clients paying. So we have had to ramp up our AR collection efforts. And I don't know, we normally might run somewhere in the 60, 65 day receivables. And it seems to me like they've creeped up somewhere in the 75 or 80 day receivables. And I don't know if that's related, but it's certainly something that we're struggling with. It's absolutely something that if we could fix that problem would help me sleep better at night. But it's just something that we're dealing with, and I feel certain that we're not alone in that fight. But so that's sort of where we stand. Again, I'm optimistic about where we're going to be. I like this opportunity to talk to those who you know, we're in competition with, because I simply think that us working together as a team, we can help show the strength of our industry. We can help to ensure that those who may not be in the same position as all of us are in, we can lift them up, help them through this crisis, and then on the other side, we are going to come out of this stronger. So I want to be a resource to all of you if I can be, even if it's just if you want to call me and talk or shoot me an email. I usually have something pretty silly to say, and I'm not afraid to share it with you. So I encourage you all to keep your heads up and stay in there. Seeing all of you in person very soon. Thanks. And now I'll toss it over to Ted for the Canadian perspective. Ted, you may be muted.
There we go. Thank you very much for that, Scott. I'm learning a little bit, as I always do from you and your ups and downs and the things you're dealing with in your firm. Two things I know for sure. Number one, when that picture of the gavel came up on our first screen, Scott was reaching for it because he's chaired a few meetings now as president and he still hasn't got to bang that thing. So Scott, I feel for you. Second thing is if you check Scott's clothing at the lower ends, you might see some toes. I'm just saying. We probably won't ever be able to confirm that though. Just moving on. In Canada, we pay a lot of taxes up here. So I'd like to talk to you right away about what we could expect the government to do for us as part of this crisis. For individuals, there is a lot of benefit information out there, and it's been changing a lot over the past few weeks. And I'm going to point you, all of our Canadian people online here, to one resource that I've found really beneficial, and that is I've given you the link here. It's basically it's actually a PDF, I guess, compiled and published by Jennifer Robson, who's a professor of political management. She does this of her own free will. She just kind of took this upon herself, and what it is it basically explains, for no matter what your employment or personal or family situation is in Canada, or where you live, because it is broken down province by province, it gives you some guidance, some direction, some plain talking understanding of what you need to do to get assistance. So it's a great resource, and I suggest you check it out if you're having any types of questions like that. Next slide, please. So the other thing that the government is doing is on the small business side, or it's really the business side, because some of it's not limited to small businesses. There's really two thrusts that the federal government is moving on. One of them is to provide credit availability to businesses, and that comes in two flavors, or at least two flavors. There's what they call the Canada Emergency Business Account, where the federal government will provide free loans, a loan of up to $40,000 depending on your payroll, and there will be essentially no interest on that, if I understand it correctly. The cool thing about this is that if you qualify and you get a loan, you can actually get 25% of it forgiven if you repay it by a certain date, which means you could get as much as $10,000 gratis through this program as a small business. So something for the small businesses to check out. And this is really intended to just help small businesses with their cash flow issues and other shortfalls they're going to have, revenue shortfalls they're going to have as a result of the crisis. The other thing that's happening is there are some loan guarantees that the federal government is pushing. The BDC, the Business Development Bank, and the Export Development Corporation, which they're guaranteeing that small businesses can get loans that you only pay interest back on for the first 12 months. And the loan can be extended over a 10-year period. So they're making financing much easier in the short term. Next slide, please. The other thing that they're doing that's really significant is that they are offering businesses an emergency wage subsidy. This was just passed Saturday, and it has a lot of fine points in it that people have to read over, but essentially, up to a certain limit, employers can receive up to 75% of the salaries of their staff subsidized, which means paid for fully. And the trick is that employers have to qualify for this on a month-to-month basis, and you have to prove to the government that you've lost at least a percentage of your normal revenue. So there's a bit of a financial wheeling dealing has to be done here. The goal on the government's part is to prevent layoffs and to rehire laid off workers. So that's what they're hoping that small businesses are going to do. And I provided a link here which directs businesses towards this. This one here is not, this emergency wage subsidy is not just small businesses. For example, Air Canada, a very large employer, is taking advantage of this program apparently. So it's of potentially great benefit. It's going to extend from retroactively from March 15th till sometime in June. That's the current limits of it. So there are actually 3 months that you can qualify for this subsidy on if you're a business. Next slide. Sorry, next slide, please. Thanks. Yeah, that's it. Just wanted to talk very quickly about some of the differences that we've seen provincially. In Canada, there are two provinces that have been hit the worst by the COVID-19 virus, Ontario and Quebec. Other provinces have been affected, but not as much. And that has impacted the way the provinces have reacted. In Quebec, virtually all construction is shut down, and in Ontario, quite a bit of construction, and they've just made it more strict in the last few days, has been shut down. So if you're doing work in other provinces, first thing to do, call and make sure that you can actually do the work that you're being contracted to do. The other thing that comes with this is travel restrictions. They're making it difficult to travel from province to province in places. I live in Ottawa, which is on the border of Quebec, and we have people that have trouble crossing the bridge every morning to get from one side to the other side of the city because the police are checking on why you're traveling. And so there's a lot of that, and you just have to be familiar with it. We've actually got signs that a couple of our staff carry with them in their cars to flash to people that are doing these checks. I guess what I really wanted to present here in this little part is quickly what we found effective when you're trying to do work on a job site or at your client's site. What we found is that there's a lot of wariness out there about exposure, rightly so, and we've developed a sort of a little series of protocols that we feel provides some protection to both our clients and our staff and the company going forward through this. So we called sort of a declaration of compliance. And basically what it says is that the individual who's visiting the site confirms that he or she has no knowledge they've been exposed to the virus, that they are going to adhere to the general protocols that we've got established for behavior in this environment, that if there are special things at the site they're visiting that they have to conform with, that they're aware of them and that they will conform with them. And then that they are also conforming with some special company safety measures that we've established, which are a little, they're just a summary of what other people felt were good practices as well. So those four things are what sort of create this declaration of compliance. Next slide, please. So this is what our little form looks like. It sort of takes those four elements and then has our staff member sign it at the bottom, and they can actually sign this every day that they go to the site, and if there's no other protocol on the site, this gives the people on the site some sort of understanding, some sort of comfort that we're following some strict guidelines. Many sites that we visited in the past little while, they already have this sort of thing in place, and you've got to sign their forms. So that's something else you might run across as you're doing your work. So either way, it's just establishing that you are not exposing someone else and they're not exposing you. Next slide. So the question is, what else can we do besides do the obvious, protect ourselves, protect those around us, try to not associate with people as much as possible. Obviously, this creates some rough issues in a lot of ways. As Scott mentioned, mental health is a big issue right now. There's all kinds of good advice out there for proactive things that people can do. And I just encourage everyone to read those. I'm sure we all have been reading them. The one thing that I found that's a common thread with all of these messages is to do things that are positive for you and your future. This is a time when you may have a little extra time on your hands, and if you can get yourself to just, move forward with some of the things that are going to work for you in the future, that's a great place to start. Next slide. So here's something that we can get into pretty easily. We can all try to get another designation let's, IBEC's got these great designations. They're very onerous in the application process, and then you've got to take an exam. What a great time it is right now to be getting involved with some of these things. So I encourage you guys heartily to do that. And that's really all I've got. I'll turn it over now to Stephen Safran.
Thanks, Ted. I appreciate that, and appreciate the update from your world in Canada. And sounds like you guys up there in the Great North are maybe a little bit ahead of some of the United States down here. But I appreciate the opportunity to be on. As Brian stated at the beginning of the webinar, I am General Counsel for IIBEC and happy to provide some updates. Our firm's been doing our own webinar every week, and so we've covered most of these topics, but we'll jump right into it. So if we can go to the first slide. So the Cyber Infrastructure Security Administration, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security, has issued 2 memorandums. The latest one they issued was March 28th. It provides guidance on essential critical infrastructure workforce, and it has considerations for government and business. And one of the items, when you look at number 4, it's kind of hard to see, but what it reads as: when continuous remote work is not possible, businesses should enlist strategies to reduce the likelihood of spreading the disease. This includes, but is not limited to, separating staff, offsetting site shift hours, and social distancing. These steps can help preserve the workforce and allow operations to continue. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time today on the OSHA side and the OSHA guidelines and the safe site practices, because we are trying to keep it within the hour. That's a whole other webinar in itself. But there's a little bit of guidance coming out from OSHA. When you read through the OSHA guidance, it provides, helpful tips. It's the same thing that they've been telling everybody since day one: wash your hands, stay 6 feet away, clean tools, disinfect the work area. The problem is that I think for the majority of construction sites in the states that are still allowing construction to operate under the essential operations arm of these state orders, or even some of the local municipality or county orders, is that they are not taking these precautions on site. I have a brother that works in the construction industry. He is a site superintendent for a general contractor. He texted me today and said, "Steve, you'd never believe it, but I'm here in a 25,000 square foot area with 30 other people, and 3 of us are wearing masks." And that's just, it blows my mind. I mean, for somebody, I'm fortunate I can work from home, but he doesn't have that. He doesn't have that luxury. So again, this is not really my section of the webinar, but I want to express to everybody that the concerns should be founded. And this, the new normal going forward needs to be protocols in place: hand washing stations, disinfecting the site multiple times a day, washing the hand washing stations, washing your hands after you use the porta-john. The porta-john is the most, probably worst, germy place on the site. So I can't emphasize that enough. There's guidelines that are coming out from the federal government and the state and local municipalities, but that's all they are right now, is guidelines. So people really need to think of this as a time to be innovative, to think of this as the new normal, and to take care of your workforce. Because I can tell you, I've had clients that have had employees that have tested positive, and the county health department essentially says anybody that has been within 6 feet of that individual for more than 10 minutes needs to be in self-quarantine. So he risks not being on the staff of the site. Next slide, please. So I'll continue on a little bit of other aspects of this CISA order, and we'll scroll through the pop-outs here. Thank you. So it also includes public works and infrastructure support services. So obviously public works speaks for itself: sanitary sewer, water treatment facilities, Anything that requires, running water, toilets to be able to flush, the roads to be able to operate, anything like that is considered that critical infrastructure. It also does include provisions for workers such as plumbers, electricians, exterminators, builders, contractors. So it's really a catch-all phrase. And it goes back to what I was just saying, is that it's really incumbent upon the contractors, the owners, the general contractors, the subcontractors, down to the consultants and design professionals on the site to take your own measures into hand and make sure that you are wearing a mask, make sure that you're washing your hands, make sure that areas are being disinfected. And I'm sure if everybody on the webinar right now could speak, I'm sure several of you might raise your hand and say, boy, I just went to a project site yesterday and none of that's happening. And that would not be surprising to me. That's just the way it is. So go ahead and cycle through this slide because it's going to pop out the two. That's the first one. Second one is the general catch-all for construction. Then we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. There are some states that have deemed construction as a non-essential service. That includes, as of yesterday, Washington State, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Vermont. For anybody that's been, tracking the news, they understand that these are what they consider to be the hotspot states. These are the states where they've got the highest amount of cases, maybe the highest amount of deaths, and the states where they're saying that, the ICUs are getting, capacity is getting full. Vermont's the oddball out there, and the best we can tell is Vermont deemed construction non-essential because it has a lot of contractors that come into Vermont from upstate New York to perform construction activities. So I think they had so much of that they decided, hey, we want to keep those folks in New York. We'll keep our citizens here, and that's why they shut down their construction. States that have local restrictions include Boston, Massachusetts, the Boston area, Utah, Wyoming, California, and Maine. That really reflects the hotspots within those states. For instance, San Francisco and California. Wyoming's an odd one. I don't think we hear a lot about stuff coming out from Wyoming, but it really depends on what level of cases they have there, what the death rate is, and again, ICU capacity. So I got this from a pretty good source, the Journal of Light Construction. So want to make sure to put the source. There's a link down at the bottom. So if you just Google that, they have a really good tracker on their website that tells you all the different states. And this would be for the United States. I'm not sure they're doing it for Canada. Sorry, Ted, but this would be only be for the lower 50 states. And it does tell you which ones are still operating, and it gives you a good tool to track that, because I understand that I'm talking to people that might not necessarily be in Raleigh, North Carolina right now. So, and y'all are spread throughout the United States and Canada, maybe some other places. Next slide, please, and I'll get into the meat and the substance of my presentation. But what I want to talk about mostly today is best practices for construction preparation, and what I'm really focusing on is contractual terms. And I will just preface that by saying that contracts in general are not, the current industry contracts are not built to reflect the realities of a COVID-19 pandemic and the effect that it can have on the construction industry. I don't think we've seen anything like this in the United States since 1918, the influenza pandemic in 1918. And when you read through the consensus docs or the AIA or the EJCDC or any other proprietary contracts that a lawyer has drafted, it might reference epidemic in the force majeure clause. That is the extent that you're going to see in a current contract as far as being able to tackle or deal with the other issues that occur as a result of COVID-19. Next slide, please, and we'll jump into this a little bit. So the first thing, and this is kind of the overarching goal of my portion of it, is to talk about the force majeure notices. And again, as I said earlier, you'd be lucky to find the word epidemic in some force majeure notices. So the fact is COVID-19 is going to impact construction projects. That's, as I said multiple times, this is the new normal. This is what people need to plan for going forward. This thing is not going to go away next week. It will impact your site. It might impact your workforce, whether that's one of your employees or yourself getting it, or you or one of your employees being exposed to another worker for a subcontractor or somebody else on site that has it. This is the reality. People need to start making plans and acting as though this is going to happen. I can't stress that enough. When I first got into lawyering, I was an in-house counsel, and I would compare this to what my first lesson in human resources management was, is the majority of managers, when they have an HR issue, the majority of people want to say the 5 words, maybe this will go away. And I just think I get the sense from the construction industry and my clients and some other folks that we're talking to that there's enough people that aren't taking this seriously, and I feel like they're going to regret it. They might get lucky, but I feel like they're going to regret it. So again, at the present time, nobody knows how much or how it's going to affect. Force majeure literally is translated as an act of God. I would consider the COVID-19 pandemic to be an act of God. But again, when you read a force majeure clause, it says things like acts of God, including fire, terrorist attacks, worker strikes, things that I think in the course of history, or even in the last 100 years of human history on construction sites, these are things they have experienced. And again, this COVID-19 pandemic is something we haven't seen in 100 years. And what I hope we see going forward is, concerted efforts to modify contractual language to reflect these sort of things going forward. Next slide, please. Typically, the force majeure provisions consider, one of four different things, and I'm trying to be as broad as possible and not throw specific contract clauses at you. But the first is whether the event was outside the reasonable control of a party. So in your instance, if you're a consultant or an architect or an engineer on a project, the first question of whether the force majeure provision applies is what was the cause of the delay or the event outside of your control. I think it's easy to say that the COVID-19 pandemic is outside of every human being's control right now. And some of you may be asking the question, well, what if I know I have it and I go to the site and give it to the rest of the workforce and that's my fault? Well, I think that's something you might, first of all, don't do that. Second of all, that might actually negate the force majeure clause. So as Ted was saying, I like that sheet that he presented for his employees, just checking the box, signing it, saying I don't have any symptoms. So, that's something to consider. The second is, was the event reasonably foreseeable? I think reasonably foreseeable without some other language or some other context as to the COVID-19 pandemic is debatable. As I've said, this hasn't happened in 100 years. Does that mean it's foreseeable? Well, when you look at contract language, I think the answer is no. And, AIA documents get updated every 10 years. And I can guarantee you, they just did their latest in 2017. I will guarantee you, if they don't do an amendment between now and 2027, when they meet in 2027, they better talk about the COVID-19 pandemic and the effect it had and what contract provisions they need to update to address these things in the future. The third is, does it affect the party's ability to perform? Right now, as I said, a lot of construction sites are business as usual. But if you have the instance where enough workers are exposed that it essentially shuts the job down, or if you're in a state that shuts construction down and renders it non-essential, then yes, it's going to affect your ability to perform the job. Reasonable steps to avoid or mitigate the outcome, that's another one. And I'll go ahead and move to this next slide because I'm getting a little bit behind, a little wordy, and I apologize for that. So there's some other things. I did have a few more slides, and I'll just say a few other things. There are other things that should be considered that I think we'll see going forward. such as, price fee escalation language and proposals and contracts, that, if you are affected by COVID-19, there should be modification language that covers labor and material changes. That might, there might be supply demand crunches, things like that. There's also other things to consider, such as a limitation on liquidated damages if the project falls behind due to a COVID-19 reason. Waiver of consequential damages, as far as, consequential damages, things like lost profit, lost rent, because we couldn't get the condos open soon enough. And then you're going to need to limit the application of the no damages for delay clause. No damages for delay clause, in a nutshell, is essentially if you are claiming damages as a result of a delay, any delay, then that is outside the recovery of the contract. So people really need to start thinking, I hate the term, but outside the box as far as contractual language goes. A few other things is, change order language for COVID-19. Some contracts have risk of loss clauses that basically place the risk of loss down the chain on subcontractors, subconsultants, things like that. That needs to be a consideration. And a COVID-19 related duty to mitigate clause, things like if you're in control of a project site, what steps have you taken to prevent the COVID-19 exposure to the workforce? I believe we had one question from John Wooten. Which part of the country are you seeing the most impacted? It's probably hard to go back to that slide, but the slide that I showed you on the essential operations by state, I'd say New York and New Jersey right now are the ones that are most impacted as far as construction projects not ongoing. Washington and Michigan are probably pretty close behind. It's interesting because I've done these webinars and I represent other associations, and I actually had somebody ask the question of me saying, well, we had a New York job, and it was I think it was a decking subcontractor. We had a New York job that got shut down, but then there was only, then they said, well, we've only got 200,000 square feet to go. The project is currently in an unstable form. You've got to get the decking down to stabilize the steel structure around it. So they actually recalled the decking contractor to finish that aspect of the work and get the project to a safe, safe, structurally sound point. And his question was, I got to fly this guy from Indiana back to New York. Is he going to, should I do that? And I said, I don't really have a good answer for that. I can't tell you if Indiana is going to not let him back. But it's just interesting. Those are the things that are going to need to be considered if there are shutdowns of projects. What place is that project in? Is that project at a place where it can, effectively be safely shut down, that it's structurally sound? I believe I have run over my time allotment. I appreciate, and I think we might have a Q&A at the end. So if there's any other questions, be happy to ask. But I believe I'm gonna throw it to the next presenter. And again, thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you. I want to thank Scott and Brian for having me today. Appreciate it. I'm going to go into a little bit more on the resources available to you through the federal government, through mainly the loan program, kind of give you a high view of what's been happening here in Washington and what comes next. So we can go to the next slide. Next slide. We can go to the next slide again. I just wanted to share with you, because we are moving into phase what I call 3.5, and we'll get into what 3.5 means in a little at the end of this. But I wanted to again give you an overview of what phase 1 and what phase 2 look like. Not going to discuss them, but just wanted to let you know what is in those first couple phases that Congress debated early on and what it means. Next slide. And then you have phase 3, the CARES Act, which most of you are going to be wanting to know a little bit about. So we will focus mainly on, it does talk about employer payroll taxes and family leave and things like that, and unemployment compensation. We really want to focus there on the bottom, the small business loans, the $349 billion. through those loans, and then we'll talk about phase 3.5. Next slide. Right now you have some loans. There are other loans available. These are the two main loans that people are focusing on and where the funding has gone. These are through the Small Business Administration, and the first one is the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP loan. And then the second one is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, or the EIDL loan, and we'll go through both of those. The PPP loans are the most popular ones. It's a new program that has been added to the current 7A loan program, and it allows for companies with fewer than 500 employees to apply. It does include sole proprietors and independent contractors. So, and I'm going to give you the high level view here, but if Brian or Scott, if your members have questions after the fact, I'm happy to do this after the presentation and another day in a phone call or an email if somebody has more specifics they want. But there are some good SBA guidance documents out there that will explain some of this. So the biggest question I get is, if I'm a business owner, can I include independent contractors in my salary calculation? And the answer is no. Independent contractors can apply for these loans on their own. These are 100% guaranteed by the federal government, which means you don't have to have any collateral to back this up. It's going to be different than the EIDL, where you're going to need collateral. And this covers an 8-week period, and that starts February 15th and the end date of June 30th, where you can apply for these loans. As long as you keep people employed through that 8-week period or bring people back during that 8-week period, we'll talk about what the forgiveness portion of that will be. The max amount of the loans were supposed to be $10 million. In the later slides, we'll talk about how that has changed. And the loans are forgivable if they're used for payroll, health insurance, interest on debt, rent/mortgages, or utilities. Next slide. How do you calculate the amount you can receive? Well, you take your monthly payroll costs over the last 12 months and multiply that by 2.5, and that's the number you come up with. And payroll costs are defined as salary, wages, commissions, or similar compensation. It can include tips, payment of cash tips or equivalents, payment for vacation, parental, family, medical, or sick leave, allowances for dismissal or separation, payment required for the provision of group health insurance benefits, including premiums, and retirement benefits, and any state and local tax assessed for employees' compensation. This does apply to all your employees up to $100,000. So if you have somebody who's making $120,000 or plus, you can calculate their payroll at $100,000, not the $120,000 that they may be getting. So it's capped at $100,000. Payroll costs will not include any payroll tax credits. There are other business credits in the earlier phase 1 and phase 2s of the appropriations that you can take advantage of as a business owner, but that you cannot double dip, which means you can't take advantage of the PPP program through some of those benefits being forgiven, and then take some of the tax credits are offered through the tax code. And again, this is covered through February 15th and ends June 30th is the last time that you can apply for that. I will tell you right now that I have talked to 2 banks today that they are accepting applications through today, and that's it. And so you may have to talk to your bank if you have not started to, is when they're going to cut this off. So next slide. The key piece of this is the forgiveness. So they are considered loans, but really I would call them grants in most cases. As long as you use whatever dollar number that the bank is giving you or the Small Business Administration grants you, as long as you use 75% of that loan amount as for salaries, then you will have the entire loan forgiven. No more of that 25% can be used for utilities. And utilities is a word that I get a lot of questions about. What is a utility? It's not defined in the guidance, and I think utilities is going to vary from industry to industry. It may include your cell phones. It may include your office phones. It may include protective equipment. There are now folks who want to know if they are out on jobs, or if their industries in, say, like the for-hire transportation industry, if they can sanitation and masks and things like that can be included as utilities. My answer to that is there is no clear guidance on that, but if you're I think that utility is going to differ from industry to industry, and so you're going to have to make a best guess estimate on what utility means for you. If you have a portion of your loan that is used for other things beyond that 25%, and you have to pay that back, it will be paid back over a period of 2 years with an interest rate of 1%. The original text of the stat or the law that was passed, it was 0.5%. They have upped that to 1%, and you can have the loan payments deferred for a period of up to 6 months. And if you rehire, again, if you hire employees already laid off and restore their pay, you will have your loan forgiven. Next slide. Then I want, just before we move on to the EIDLs, I just want to kind of give you a quick update on where we are as of last night with the PPP loans. As of last night, or as of Monday, $247.5 billion in loans were granted. The average loan size was $239,000. About 70% of the total number of loans approved were less than $150,000. More than 3,200 of the loans were for more than $5 million. And construction businesses were the top industry recipient of these loans, totaling $34 billion. Texas led all states with the number of most approved loans at $21.8 billion. And SBA said as of Tuesday afternoon, nearly 1.2 million applications were approved, totaling $268 billion. And so when you're looking at a fund that has $349 billion in it, and we've already used $268 billion, there's not a lot left for those of you who have not yet applied for the loan. If you have and you're still waiting, I would check with your bank. You're going to get 2 notices from your bank, one that it was submitted and 2 that it was been approved. So if you haven't gotten word yet, I would check with your bank today, because again, I'm talking to 2 banks. I know they've cut the application process down to the end of today, and then they're done. They fully acknowledge that the money has run out, that they're not going to process any more loans applications after today, because there won't, unless Congress applies for some more money or puts more money into the banks, then they won't be able to do that. So that's where we are with the PPP loans. Then we move to the economic injury disaster loans, or EIDLs. These loans were supposed to be, these apply for folks, again, under 500 employees, with working capital of up to $2 million is what you could apply for. This was the original intent. I got a notice the other day that the max that you will be able to get under an EIDL loan is $25,000. So if you have applied for a PPP loan, that money should be starting to get into your account. I've talked to several people in the businesses who are starting to find that money in their bank account. EIDL was one of those where if you applied, you were supposed to get there was a box you could check that you wanted a $10,000 advance within 3 days. Lots of people checked that box. They did not get that loan, that advance within 3 days. Those advances are now starting to be put out as of yesterday. So you should check with your bank again to see if you applied for an EIDL advance, $10,000 advance. The kicker with the advance is it's no longer $10,000. It's because they've had so many people apply for the EIDLs. They've had to go back and change that, and it's based on the number of employees that you have, up to $10,000 maximum, which you'll be able to get. So if you have a firm of 5 people, the max EIDL advance that you will be able to get is $5,000. And the EIDL, you can use this for more than just payroll, and you can use it for other things that you have debt. If you're building onto a new facility, you can use those costs for that. So you have more flexibility to use the EIDL money for other things other than payroll. These have also a longer repayment terms. These are loans. These aren't going to be forgiven. You have up to 30 years to repay these loans. The law says that there's no more than 4% that can be charged on an interest rate. Right now, my understanding is that it's going to be 3.75, but it will be no more than 4.4% at any point in time of that process. Next slide. That's really all I have. That's really a high view level of this. I can tell you, if we go into what we're looking at, phase 3.5, as I call it, you've all probably heard that the Republicans and Democrats are going back and forth on trying to add another $250 billion to this pot so that others can receive these loans and grants. I fully expect them to get there. It was expected that they would try to get that done by last Thursday. That didn't happen, and that was really more political in nature than anything else. They tried to do it Monday. They adjourned without a deal. They expect to come back tomorrow, and my understanding is the White House is dealing directly with Senator Schumer on the Democratic side to see what they want, and there is a lot of skepticism on the Republican side whether they will accept any of those terms, and some of that what Democrats want. They want more money for food programs to feed kids. They want another $100 billion for hospitals, and then they want some more money for unemployment and things like that for workers. We will get a deal. The question becomes, what kind of, it won't be a clean $250 billion deal. Democrats will hold out and get something, and then we will see what that is. And so I suspect either this week or early next week that we will have another infusion of cash into this program. So if you have not applied, I would check with your bank if they're going to still accept applications. If you haven't, you really got to get it in. Otherwise, you will be at the, you're already starting at the bottom of the barrel here, but I would urge them to get it in ASAP. With that, that's all I have. Brian, I will turn it back to you.
Paul, thanks for that. I want to thank our panelists. We've got a few minutes left for some questions. And I'm going to have the staff run through there's a few more slides simply to show some of the upcoming stuff at IIBEC. We've got ICBEC coming up in August. Knock on wood that happens. You can always get education from IIBEC online, anywhere, anytime. We are starting a new, we got the International Convention and Trade Show next year is going to be in Phoenix, and you can see those dates. They're actually hidden by some of the tools I have up here. Let's see if I can move that. March 4th through 9th. Next slide. And just to thank you, the last slide that I wanted to touch base on, which is, it must be the last slide. Is there one more slide, Carolyn? Folks have been asking, and this is my soft launch, or our soft launch of this discussion. Many folks have been asking what we're going to do about the 2020 trade show and convention that was postponed a couple weeks ago. We are in the process of taking that convention and trade show virtual. We are working right now with our speakers and sponsors. We have secured dates for a virtual event of June 12 to 14. Those of you who are registered will have access to this event. That access will last from June 12th all the way till July 15th. So you can sort of consume that education as you'd like over a month. Details should be in your email inbox by Friday, but since we had some folks on the phone today, I thought I would give you some good news and something to look forward to in June, which is sort of engaging in the normal IIBEC convention, albeit in a virtual fashion. So are there other questions that folks have that they'd like to post in the chat box? We are going to be posting this webinar, the audio and the recording that you see here. We will post that to the website shortly, probably by tomorrow or Friday. A couple of you asked for some of the data points that Paul had talked about, and we will get those from him. In addition to that, we have a page on our website that has a large number of these resources, links to the IRS program, links to the SBA program, links to stuff going on at Treasury. In addition, we've got links to some of the programs that Ted mentioned in Canada. So that stuff is all available. If folks know of other resources that we should post, we are happy to post them. We'll double check them, but we want to be able to provide a service to you all as members to be able to find out what's going on and how these things are affecting your work on a daily basis. So With no questions, I see no other questions popping up. I want to thank everyone for helping us to participate in this today. Thank our speakers again. They did a great job on some short notice. As we move on through this time period, if we need to do more of these webinars, we will certainly do that. And we look forward to seeing you virtually in June, if not sooner, in another virtual event. Thank you all for participating today, and thank you all for being members of IIBEC.